The clock is ticking. Iran just gave its answer to Washington, and Donald Trump did not hold back. He called it totally unacceptable. But what exactly did Iran propose? What is really happening behind the diplomatic theater? And why is this moment more dangerous than most people realize? Let me walk you through what is actually unfolding here. Not the headlines, not the spin, the reality. Donald Trump recently put forward what his administration is calling a peace proposal to Tehran. The details have not been made fully public, but from what has surfaced, it appears to involve some form of negotiation around Iran's nuclear program, regional influence, and possibly sanctions relief. It sounds reasonable on the surface: a deal, diplomacy, peace. But Iran's response was not what Washington expected, or perhaps it was exactly what they expected. Tehran responded with conditions that Trump and his circle immediately labeled as totally unacceptable. And that is where we are now, on the edge of another escalation. Again. So what did Iran actually say? Based on the patterns of Iranian diplomacy over the past 2 decades, their response likely included several non-negotiable points. First, full recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Second, complete lifting of all economic sanctions before any formal agreement. Third, guarantees that the United States will not unilaterally withdraw from any future agreement like it did with the JCPOA in 2018. Fourth, acknowledgement of Iran's security interests in the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. These are not new demands. Iran has been saying this for years. But for Washington, especially under Trump, these points are considered completely off the table. Why? Because accepting them would mean recognizing Iran as a regional power with legitimate security concerns. And that is something the United States and its allies in the region, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, are not willing to do. Let me explain the deeper game here. This is not really about nuclear weapons. It never was. It is about control. It is about who gets to dominate the Middle East. The nuclear issue is a tool, a pressure point, a justification for sanctions, for isolation, for military posturing. If Iran genuinely dismantled every centrifuge tomorrow, the core conflict would still remain, because the core conflict is geopolitical. It is about Iran's refusal to submit to a U.S.-led regional order. Iran learned a lesson in 2018. They negotiated in good faith under the JCPOA. They allowed inspections. They reduced their enrichment capacity. They complied with every requirement. And then Trump walked away from the deal. He reimposed maximum pressure sanctions. He strangled Iran's economy. And he did it not because Iran violated the agreement. The IAEA confirmed Iran was in compliance. He did it because the deal did not serve the broader strategic goal of containing Iranian influence. So when Trump now comes back with another proposal, Tehran is skeptical, and rightfully so. Why should they trust a negotiation process that can be ripped apart the moment political winds shift in Washington? Why should they give up leverage before getting concrete guarantees? This is not stubbornness. This is strategic calculation based on historical experience. Now let us look at Trump's position. He called Iran's response totally unacceptable. That language is not accidental. It is a signal to domestic audiences that he is tough on Iran, a signal to Israel and the Gulf states that he will not compromise on their security concerns, and a signal to Tehran that if diplomacy fails, other options remain on the table. But here is the problem. Trump is operating under the assumption that maximum pressure will eventually break Iran, that sanctions, isolation, and the threat of military action will force Tehran to capitulate. This strategy has been tried for over 2 decades. It has not worked. Instead, it has pushed Iran to develop asymmetric capabilities. It has strengthened hardliners in Tehran. It has expanded Iranian influence through proxy networks across the region. It has accelerated their nuclear program beyond where it was before the JCPOA. The American strategy toward Iran has been fundamentally flawed since the 1979 revolution. Washington has never truly accepted the loss of its client state. The Shah was America's man in the Gulf. He was the regional policeman. He guaranteed oil flows. He provided intelligence. He maintained stability on American terms. When he fell, the United States lost not just an ally, but an entire strategic framework. Every administration since then has tried to either reverse that loss or punish Iran for it. The hostage crisis, the arms embargo, the designation as a state sponsor of terror, the dual containment policy, the axis of evil speech, the sanctions regime, the covert operations, the cyber attacks, all of it designed to either force regime change or force submission. But Iran did not collapse. It adapted. It built an ideology of resistance. It developed a revolutionary guard structure that operates parallel to the regular military. It created networks of support across the Shia crescent. It mastered asymmetric warfare. It learned to survive under pressure. And critically, it connected its survival to a narrative of defiance against foreign domination. That narrative is powerful. It resonates not just in Iran, but across the region. When Tehran stands up to Washington, when it refuses to bow to threats, it gains credibility. It becomes a symbol, not necessarily because people agree with the Iranian government's domestic policies. Many do not. But because in a region that has experienced colonialism, coups, invasions, and interventions, the idea of sovereignty matters. The idea of resisting external diktat matters. This is what Washington consistently fails to understand. You cannot bully Iran into submission because the entire political structure of the Islamic Republic is built around the principle of resistance to exactly that kind of pressure. The more you push, the more you validate their narrative. The more you threaten, the more you strengthen the hardliners who say negotiations with America are pointless. And that brings us back to this moment. Trump's peace proposal, Iran's response, the declaration that it is totally unacceptable. What happens next is not predetermined, but the options are narrowing, and each option carries significant risk. Let us game out the scenarios. Scenario 1 is continued stalemate. Trump keeps the sanctions in place. He keeps the pressure on. He keeps threatening military action. Iran keeps advancing its nuclear program. It keeps supporting its regional allies. It keeps testing red lines. And both sides wait for the other to blink. This can go on for months or even years, but it is inherently unstable, because at any moment an incident can trigger escalation. A tanker gets seized in the Gulf. An American drone gets shot down. A militia attacks a U.S. base in Iraq. Israel strikes an Iranian facility in Syria. Any of these incidents, which happen regularly, could spiral. The question is always whether both sides choose to de-escalate or to respond. So far, cooler heads have generally prevailed. But that is not a strategy, that is luck, and luck runs out. Scenario 2 is military action. The United States or Israel conducts strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. The goal would be to set back the program by years, to destroy centrifuges, to eliminate stockpiles of enriched uranium, to take out key scientists and infrastructure. On paper, it sounds clean. A surgical strike. Mission accomplished, problem solved. But the reality is far messier. Iran's nuclear program is dispersed. Key facilities are hardened and buried deep underground. Natanz, Fordo. These sites were built specifically to withstand aerial bombardment. Destroying them would require sustained campaigns, not single strikes. And even then, the knowledge and expertise cannot be bombed. Iran would rebuild, probably faster and with more determination than before. And then there is the response. Iran has made very clear that any attack on its territory will be met with retaliation. Not just symbolic, not just a few missiles for show. Real retaliation designed to inflict costs. Hezbollah has an arsenal of over 100,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel. They can overwhelm Israeli air defenses. They can hit critical infrastructure, power plants, water facilities, military bases, population centers. The damage would be catastrophic. In Iraq, Iranian-backed militias have shown they can strike U.S. bases with precision. They have drones, they have missiles, they have intelligence networks. American forces in the region are not invulnerable, and if Iran decides to escalate, those forces become targets. We are talking about potential American casualties, not in the abstract. Real soldiers, real deaths. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil passes through that narrow waterway. Iran has the capability to disrupt that flow. Not permanently. The U.S. Navy would eventually clear the strait. But even a temporary closure would send oil prices skyrocketing. It would shock global markets. It would trigger economic panic. And the political fallout would be enormous. So military action is not a clean solution. It is a gamble. A gamble that the damage inflicted on Iran would be worth the retaliation. A gamble that the conflict would not spiral into a regional war. A gamble that American and Israeli publics would accept the costs. And historically, those kinds of gambles in the Middle East have not gone well. Scenario 3 is a negotiated solution, but for that to happen, both sides need to move from their current positions. Trump would need to accept that Iran will not surrender, that a viable agreement requires giving Tehran something real in return for nuclear restraints. Sanctions relief, security guarantees, normalization of relations, recognition of Iran's regional role. Iran would need to accept that it cannot have everything on its terms either. It would need to show flexibility on enrichment levels, on inspection protocols, on the timeline for sanctions relief, on engaging in broader regional security discussions. Both sides would need to make compromises that their domestic audiences might see as weakness. This is politically difficult. Trump has built his entire Iran policy on the idea of toughness, of reversing the JCPOA, of proving that maximum pressure works. Backing down now would be seen as failure by his base, by the pro-Israel lobby, by the Gulf states that have supported his hard line. For Iran, the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has deep distrust of American promises. He opposed the JCPOA from the start. He only allowed President Rouhani to negotiate it because of overwhelming economic pressure. And when Trump withdrew, it confirmed everything Khamenei believed about American unreliability. Convincing him to try again would require ironclad guarantees. And even then, it is not clear he would agree. So we are stuck between bad options. A stalemate that could explode at any moment, a military option that could trigger regional catastrophe, and a diplomatic solution that neither side seems politically willing to pursue. But let me dig deeper into why this matters beyond just the immediate crisis. Because the U.S.-Iran confrontation is not happening in a vacuum. It is part of a larger transformation in global power dynamics, and understanding that context is critical. The Middle East is changing. For decades, it was a region where American power was dominant, where American decisions shaped outcomes, where American military might deterred challenges. But that era is ending, not because America is withdrawing completely, but because its dominance is no longer absolute. China is now the largest trading partner for most countries in the region. Chinese investment is rebuilding infrastructure. Chinese technology is powering telecommunications networks. Chinese diplomacy is mediating conflicts. Beijing brokered the Saudi-Iran reconciliation in 2023. That was a geopolitical earthquake. Two rival powers that had been at each other's throats for years suddenly talking. And the broker was not Washington, it was Beijing. Russia is also a player. In Syria, Russian military intervention saved the Assad regime. It established permanent military bases. It demonstrated that Moscow can project power in the region, and it showed that the United States does not have a veto over outcomes. Gulf states that once looked only to Washington for security are now hedging. They are buying Russian weapons. They are joining BRICS. They are diversifying their partnerships. This shift terrifies the old guard in Washington, because the entire post-World War II order was built on American dominance in key regions: Europe, East Asia, the Middle East. Lose dominance in one, and the others start to question whether American security guarantees are reliable. The Middle East has always been central to that system, not just because of oil, but because control over energy flows means control over the global economy. Iran sits at the heart of this transformation. It is not a superpower. It is not even a major military power in conventional terms, but it is a spoiler. It can disrupt American plans. It can challenge American clients. It can align with American rivals. And that makes it a problem that Washington cannot ignore, but also cannot easily solve. The nuclear issue is the lever. It is the justification for pressure. But the real issue is geopolitical alignment. If Iran had a pro-American government, its nuclear program would be treated very differently. Look at Pakistan. It has nuclear weapons. It has a history of proliferation. It has hosted terrorists, but it is a partner, so the weapons are tolerated. Look at India, same story. Nuclear weapons, no membership in the NPT, but a strategic partner against China, so no sanctions, no threats. Iran's sin is not enriching uranium. It is refusing to align with American interests. It is supporting groups that challenge Israeli dominance. It is backing governments that resist American intervention. It is offering an alternative model of sovereignty in a region where sovereignty has often been conditional. And that brings us to the domestic dimension. Inside Iran, there is a complex political landscape. Hardliners who believe any negotiation with America is betrayal. Moderates who believe engagement is the only way to relieve economic pressure. Reformists who want political opening. Pragmatists who just want stability, and a population that is exhausted by decades of isolation and economic hardship. The sanctions have hurt, inflation is rampant, unemployment is high, the currency has collapsed, access to medicine and technology is restricted. People are suffering, and they know it. But here's the critical point. Suffering does not automatically translate into regime change. It can, but it can also rally people around the flag, especially when the suffering is seen as externally imposed. Washington keeps waiting for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the government. It has not happened. There have been protests, some large, some violent, but none have threatened the core of the regime. Why? Because the Islamic Republic has deep roots. It has security forces that are loyal. It has an ideology that resonates with significant portions of the population. And it has positioned itself as the defender of national sovereignty against foreign aggression. Sanctions reinforce that narrative. They allow the government to blame external enemies for internal problems. They justify repression in the name of national security. They unite factions that might otherwise be divided. So, ironically, maximum pressure strengthens the very system it is supposed to weaken. Trump does not seem to understand this, or if he does not care. His approach is transactional. Apply pressure, force a deal, move on. But Iran is not a real estate negotiation. It is a civilization, a proud nation with thousands of years of history, a people who have survived empires and invasions and revolutions. They will not be humiliated into submission. And this is where the current moment becomes so dangerous. Because Trump's declaration that Iran's response is totally unacceptable closes off diplomatic space. It signals that America is not interested in compromise, that it is willing to risk confrontation rather than accept Iranian conditions. And that forces Tehran to make a choice: either back down, which it will not do, or double down, which it will. Doubling down means accelerating the nuclear program. Iran is already enriching uranium to 60% purity. That is close to weapons grade. The breakout time to a bomb is now measured in weeks, not months. If diplomacy is dead, why not go all the way? Why not build a weapon and ensure survival through deterrence? This is the nightmare scenario. And Iran with nuclear weapons fundamentally changes the regional balance. Israel would face an existential threat. Saudi Arabia would likely pursue its own nuclear program. Turkey might follow. Egypt might consider it. Suddenly, the most volatile region in the world becomes a nuclear powder keg. And preventing that is supposed to be the whole point of American policy. But the policy is achieving the opposite. It is pushing Iran toward the very outcome it is meant to prevent. Because when you offer no credible diplomatic path, when you threaten and isolate and sanction without offering a way out, the logical response is to build the ultimate deterrent. Let me be very clear about something. I am not defending the Iranian government. It is authoritarian. It represses dissent. It violates human rights. It supports groups that commit violence. These are facts. But understanding Iranian behavior requires understanding Iranian threat perceptions. From Tehran's perspective, they are surrounded by hostile forces. American bases in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Gulf states, Israeli military superiority, Saudi hostility, a history of coups and interventions. In 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's democratically elected government and installed the Shah. In the 1980s, the United States supported Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran. American ships shot down an Iranian civilian airliner, killing 290 people. The United States has conducted assassinations, sabotage, and cyber attacks on Iranian soil. This history shapes Iranian thinking. It makes them paranoid. But it is not irrational paranoia. It is based on real experiences. So when America offers a peace proposal but maintains crippling sanctions and threatens military action, Iran sees a trap, not an opportunity. A trap designed to extract concessions without giving anything real in return. And they respond accordingly, with conditions that protect their core interests, with demands that ensure any agreement is balanced, with insistence on guarantees that cannot be easily broken. Trump calls this totally unacceptable, but from a strategic perspective, it is perfectly rational. Iran is negotiating from a position of weakness economically, but strength regionally. It has leverage through its proxies, through its nuclear advances, through its ability to disrupt. So it uses that leverage to demand a fair deal, not surrender, a deal. The tragedy is that a deal is possible. Not easy, but possible. It would require the United States to accept that regime change is not happening, that Iran is here to stay, that coexistence, however uncomfortable, is the only realistic option. It would require Iran to accept limits on its nuclear program in exchange for normalization, for sanctions relief, for security guarantees. Both sides would have to swallow their pride. Both sides would have to sell compromises to skeptical domestic audiences. Both sides would have to take risks. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is continued escalation, continued suffering for the Iranian people, continued instability in the region, continued risk of war. And war would be catastrophic, not just for Iran, not just for American forces in the region, but for the entire global economy. Oil prices would spike, supply chains would break, markets would crash, and in a world already dealing with inflation and economic uncertainty, that could trigger a global recession, maybe worse. So when Trump says Iran's response is totally unacceptable, he is not just making a diplomatic statement, he is making a choice to prioritize maximalist demands over realistic solutions, a choice to risk confrontation over compromise, a choice that could have consequences far beyond what he imagines. And here is what makes this moment particularly frustrating. We have been here before. We know how this story goes. We know that threats and sanctions alone do not change Iranian behavior. We know that military action creates more problems than it solves. We know that diplomacy, however difficult, is the only sustainable path forward. The JCPOA proved it. For 2 years, it worked. Iran's nuclear program was frozen. Inspectors had access. Tensions decreased. It was not perfect. It did not solve every problem. But it managed the most dangerous problem. It prevented an Iranian bomb. And it created space for other issues to be addressed over time. Walking away from that deal was a mistake. And repeating that mistake by rejecting any Iranian conditions as unacceptable is doubling down on failure. Because at the end of the day, diplomacy is about finding solutions that all sides can live with, not solutions that one side loves and the other hates. Those do not last. They get sabotaged. They get abandoned. They lead back to conflict. What is needed now is creativity, vision, leadership willing to take political risks for long-term stability. We need negotiators who understand that the goal is not to win, but to find common ground. We need publics who understand that compromise is not weakness, but wisdom. And we need media that explains the complexity instead of reducing everything to heroes and villains. But that is not what we are getting. We are getting sound bites. We are getting posturing. We are getting escalation disguised as strength. And the window for a peaceful resolution is closing, not because it is impossible, but because the political will is absent, because leaders on both sides are trapped by their own rhetoric, because the easy path is confrontation and the hard path is compromise.